A brave police K9 refused to leave his human partner trapped beneath the rubble, his desperate barks piercing the cold dawn over Santa Monica. When an elderly widow heard his cries, secrets from the past began to unravel, changing their lives forever in ways no one could have imagined. A story of loyalty, healing, and second chances that transcends even the barriers between species. Get ready, because this story will touch your heart. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, and comment from what part of the US you're watching. Lieutenant Robert Miller opened his eyes before the alarm clock blared. 5:30 a.m., same time as always. 20 years on the Santa Monica Police Department had conditioned his body to wake with military precision. He sat on the edge of the bed and rubbed his rough hands across his face, trying to shake off the sleep still clinging to his eyelids. Through his bedroom window, the sky was just beginning to lighten. A particularly harsh winter was punishing the coastal city. Robert felt a shiver run down his spine as his feet hit the cold floor. On the other side of the room, Maximus was already alert, his intelligent brown eyes fixed on his owner, his tail thumping lightly against the worn rug where he slept. "Good morning, partner," Robert murmured, reaching out to scratch the ears of the imposing German shepherd. The dog tilted his head, enjoying the affection, before rising to his full height, shaking his black and tan fur. 5 minutes later, Robert was in the small kitchen, brewing coffee while Maximus devoured his breakfast. The apartment was modest. Living room, kitchen, one bedroom and bath. But enough for a single 35-year-old man and his loyal canine companion. On the walls, a few old photographs. Robert at his police academy graduation, with his elderly mother who passed away 3 years ago, and one he rarely looked at, showing a smiling teenager. Michael, his son, now 19, and studying in New York City, increasingly distant not only geographically. Sipping his bitter coffee, Robert checked his schedule on his phone. Morning patrol of the main square and surrounding areas. Routine, predictable, safe, exactly how he liked it. Robert Miller was a man of habits, of order, of protocols followed to the letter. His colleagues joked that he could predict emergencies simply because they dared to disrupt his carefully planned routine. 20 minutes later, dressed in his impeccably pressed uniform, Robert clipped Maximus's leash. For a moment, his fingers hesitated over the K9 badge adorning the dog's collar. 2 years ago, when Maximus was assigned as his partner, Robert had received the news with apprehension. The ironic fear of dogs that had plagued him since childhood didn't mesh well with the department's new policy of forming K9 units. "Best thing that ever happened to me, right?" he whispered to the animal, who responded with an enthusiastic tail wag. Together, they left the apartment and walked out onto the still deserted street. The air was frigid, so cold that it formed small white clouds in front of their faces with each exhale. A thin layer of frost covered the old cobblestones, causing Robert to walk cautiously. Maximus, on the other hand, strode confidently, as if the cold didn't affect him. The walk to the station was short, just 5 blocks. Robert enjoyed the walk, observing the historic city waking up. The colorful colonial houses, the wrought iron balconies adorned with winter-hardy ferns and geraniums, the small cafes beginning to turn on their lights. Santa Monica looked like something out of a postcard, preserved in time like a national treasure. On the corner of Ocean Avenue, Robert made his first stop of the day, Mrs. Teresa's Bakery, a woman of Lebanese descent who had arrived in the city over 40 years ago. The aroma of freshly baked bread hit him as he opened the door. "Lieutenant, punctual as always," greeted the gray-haired woman, already separating a package. "The usual?" "Yes, please. And a cookie for Maximus. Already set aside. He's part of the order now," smiled Mrs. Teresa, handing a small bone-shaped cookie to the dog, who gently took it in his teeth. "This winter's a harsh one, isn't it? They say it's going to snow." "Looks like it," replied Robert, paying for the sweet bread he would later distribute to the elderly at the city's nursing home, another Sunday habit he religiously maintained. "Have a good day, Mrs. Teresa." At the station, Sergeant Garcia was already brewing the strong coffee that was tradition among the officers. Maximus went straight to his designated corner, where a clean blanket awaited him. The other 2 K9 dogs hadn't arrived yet. "Anything from last night?" Robert asked, hanging up his jacket. "Quiet night. 2 lost tourists after the party at the Reef, and a false alarm at Hernandez's antique shop." Garcia handed Robert the steaming mug. "Oh, and the forecast confirms it. It's going to snow for the first time in 15 years. The mayor already activated protocols for the homeless." Robert nodded, sipping the hot coffee. After the short Sunday morning briefing, he and Maximus began their usual patrol. First, the main square with its central garden, then the commercial streets beginning to prepare for opening, finally the circuit of historical monuments that would soon be filled with tourists. Walking down Wilshire Boulevard, Robert observed the ongoing renovations at the historic mansion that had been partially damaged during the recent earthquake, small but enough to compromise some older structures. Scaffolding covered the facade and caution tape blocked the sidewalk, forcing pedestrians to walk on the other side of the street. Maximus suddenly stopped, his ears pricked in alert. Robert knew that posture. Something had caught the animal's attention. "What is it, boy?" he asked, following the dog's fixed gaze. At first he saw nothing unusual, just the building under construction, silent on that Sunday morning. But then he noticed a slight vibration in the scaffolding, almost imperceptible, causing the protective tarp to tremble slightly, despite the absence of wind. Maximus let out a low growl, a sound Robert rarely heard. The dog took a step forward, pulling on the leash. "Back, Maximus," Robert ordered, but something in the animal's behavior worried him. That's when he heard it, a sharp crack, like metal twisting under extreme pressure. Then, everything happened very quickly, a deafening roar, the sound of stone and wood breaking, and the feeling that the whole world was collapsing around him. The last thing Robert saw before everything went dark was Maximus leaping toward him, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and determination. Doña Esperanza Rodriguez followed the same ritual every morning for the past 3 years, waking before dawn, lighting a candle in front of Francisco's photograph, her late husband, and watching the sunrise from the second-floor window of her colonial house on Ocean View Drive. At 72, her body was marked by time, but her brown eyes remained alive, alert, as if constantly searching for something on the horizon. On that particularly cold morning, Esperanza wrapped herself in her thickest wool shawl, the one Francisco had brought from New Mexico on their last trip together. The room was freezing, and her arthritic fingers trembled slightly as she lit the candlewick with a match. "Good morning, my love," she whispered to the silver-framed photograph. "They say it's going to snow today. Do you remember the last time it snowed? You insisted we go for a walk, even with your rheumatism. Always so stubborn." The morning monologue was her way of keeping Francisco present. Afterward, she prepared her cinnamon tea, sat in the leather armchair by the window, and opened the lace curtains to wait for the first rays of sunlight. It was there, in that moment between night and day, that Esperanza felt closest to the husband she lost to a sudden heart attack. The minutes passed slowly. The sky was beginning to turn pale pink when Esperanza noticed something unusual. A movement on the deserted street, near the mansion under renovation. She narrowed her eyes, trying to discern shapes in the shadows. For a moment, she thought she had seen someone, a police officer and a dog. But then there was a flash, a deafening noise, and part of the mansion's structure collapsed in a cloud of dust. Esperanza rose as quickly as her joints would allow, spilling her tea in the process. Her heart pounded in her chest. She was sure of what she had seen. Someone was there at the moment of the collapse. Without thinking twice, she grabbed her carved walking stick, a 70th birthday gift made by Francisco himself, and headed for the door. "What are you doing, Esperanza?" she muttered to herself as she carefully descended the stairs. "Call emergency services like a normal person," but something propelled her outside. Perhaps it was the fact that, in the past 3 years, she had become little more than an observer of life, watching the world through the window without really participating in it. Or maybe it was that strange feeling that had been with her since she woke up, as if Francisco were particularly close that morning. As she opened the front door, the cold morning air hit her like a slap. Esperanza pulled the shawl tighter around her shoulders and walked as fast as she could toward the scene of the collapse. The dust hadn't completely settled yet, causing her to cough as she approached. That's when she heard it, a bark followed by another and another. Desperate barks coming from under the rubble. Following the sound, Esperanza skirted the perimeter of the collapse until she spotted what she was looking for, a large German shepherd, partially covered in dust, barking frantically next to a pile of rubble. The dog's police uniform was unmistakable. "Oh my God," Esperanza exclaimed, approaching the animal. "Where's your owner, friend?" As if understanding the question, the dog looked toward the pile of rubble and barked even more urgently. Esperanza followed his gaze and realized with horror, under the rubble, partially visible, was a human arm in a police uniform. Her first instinct was to shout for help, but the street was still deserted at that hour. She pulled her cell phone from her coat pocket, a device she rarely used, an insistent gift from her daughter who lived in Austin, and dialed emergency services. Emergency services? There's been a collapse on Ocean View Drive in front of number 47. A police officer is trapped under the rubble. Please come quickly. Hanging up the phone, Esperanza approached the animal, which was now alternating between barking upward and licking what it could reach of its owner's arm. "Easy, boy," she said softly, extending her hand toward the dog. To her surprise, instead of showing aggression, the animal sniffed her hand and allowed a brief caress. Help is on the way. The next few minutes felt like an eternity. The cold intensified as the sky fully brightened. Esperanza noticed that the dog was trembling. From cold or fear, she couldn't tell. Without thinking twice, she removed her own shawl and carefully wrapped the animal. "You're a good boy," she murmured. "So loyal to your owner." The words died in her throat as she thought of Francisco, how he would have wished to have someone by his side in his final moments, instead of leaving alone while she was at the store. The guilt she had carried for 3 years returned with full force, causing her eyes to well up. The sound of sirens in the distance brought Esperanza back to reality. Soon, the quiet street transformed into a center of frantic activity. Paramedics, firefighters, and police officers flooded the scene. Someone tried to move Esperanza and the dog away, but the animal refused to separate from its owner, and Esperanza, surprising herself, stood firmly beside the German Shepherd. "This dog isn't going anywhere without his owner, and I'm not going anywhere without this dog," she declared with a firmness she hadn't felt in years. The firefighters worked methodically to remove the rubble. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, they managed to free the trapped officer. Esperanza watched anxiously as the paramedics assessed his vital signs. "He's alive," one of the doctors announced, and a collective sigh of relief swept through the crowd that had formed. The German Shepherd tried to move forward when they placed his owner on the stretcher, but one of the paramedics stopped him. "Sorry, buddy, but you can't go in the ambulance." That's when Esperanza stepped forward. "Which hospital?" she asked. "UCLA Medical Center," replied the paramedic, already helping to load the stretcher. "I'll take the dog there," Esperanza stated, surprising herself again. "What's his name?" "The dog, I mean." One of the officers present answered, "The dog is Maximus, the officer is Robert Miller." Esperanza nodded and gently held Maximus's leash, who still watched anxiously as the ambulance drove away. "Come on, Maximus," she said softly. "Let's go see your owner." The dog looked at her with what seemed to be a mixture of distrust and hope. After a moment of hesitation, he allowed Esperanza to guide him away from the accident scene. As they slowly walked toward the nearest taxi stand, Esperanza reflected on the strange chain of events that had pulled her out of her self-imposed isolation. For 3 years, she had hidden inside her house, living only through the window. Now she was on the street with a police dog in tow, about to get into a taxi to a hospital. Francisco would be proud, she thought, feeling a comforting warmth in her chest for the first time in a long time. Small snowflakes began to fall, delicate as feathers, settling on Esperanza's shoulders and Maximus's dark fur. The first snowfall in 15 years, witnessed by a widow and a dog, both united by fate and loyalty to the people they loved. An improbable beginning to an even more improbable connection. UCLA Medical Center was a modern building that contrasted with the colonial architecture of Santa Monica. Surrounded by well-maintained gardens even in winter, the hospital complex received patients from all over the region. In the emergency room waiting area, Esperanza tried to calm Maximus, who wouldn't stop pacing back and forth, occasionally looking toward the double doors where they had taken his owner. "I know you're worried," Esperanza murmured, stroking the animal's fur. "I would be too." A young nurse approached, looking apprehensively at the imposing German Shepherd. "Ma'am, I'm sorry to inform you that animals are not allowed in the hospital." Esperanza straightened her shoulders, invoking an authority she didn't know she still possessed. "This isn't just any animal. He's a K9 officer of the Santa Monica Police Department, and his human partner is being treated here." The nurse hesitated, clearly unprepared for the situation. "I understand, but the rules, what are the rules for a dog that just saved an officer's life?" Esperanza persisted. "Please speak to your supervisor. In the meantime, we'll stay here without bothering anyone." With a resigned sigh, the nurse walked away. Minutes later, a middle-aged doctor with deep dark circles under his eyes and a clipboard in hand approached. "Mrs. Rodriguez?" he asked, consulting some notes. "I'm Dr. Evans. I understand you were present at the time of the accident?" "Yes, doctor. How is Officer Miller?" The doctor briefly looked at Maximus before answering. "Stable. He suffered a concussion, has 3 fractured ribs and a fracture in his right arm, but considering the nature of the accident, I can say he was very lucky. If he hadn't been found so quickly," he left the sentence hanging in the air. Maximus, as if understanding, let out a small whimper. The doctor observed the animal with renewed interest. "How long will he be hospitalized?" Esperanza asked. "At least a week for observation. After that, he'll have a long recovery period at home." The doctor paused. "Are you a relative?" "No, just a neighbor. But I'm worried about Maximus. Who will take care of him while the officer is here?" "Normally another officer would handle that, but..." The doctor consulted his notes again. "From what I understand, the K9 unit is short-staffed, with 2 units in training out of town." Esperanza made an instant decision, surprising herself again. "I'll take care of him." Both the doctor and Maximus seemed surprised by the statement. "Ma'am, he's a working animal, trained. He's not just any pet," the doctor warned. "I'm perfectly aware of that, doctor. I'm a widow. I live alone in a spacious house with a garden, and I have all the time in the world." Esperanza leaned toward Maximus. "What do you say, officer? Would you like to stay with me until your partner gets better?" To the astonishment of both, Maximus approached Esperanza and rested his head on her knee, looking at her with his expressive brown eyes. "It seems we have an agreement," said the doctor, smiling slightly. "I'll inform the station. We'll need your ID and contact information." As the doctor walked away, Esperanza felt a wave of anxiety. What was she doing? At 72, after 3 years of almost total seclusion, she was taking a police dog home. Francisco would have laughed at her impulsiveness. He, always so cautious and methodical, while she often let her heart lead the way. 3 hours later, after completing all the necessary paperwork and receiving basic instructions on Maximus's care, Esperanza returned home in a taxi, accompanied by the silent German shepherd. The snow had stopped, but the cold persisted, transforming Santa Monica into a winter postcard. "I'm nervous too," she confessed to Maximus as the taxi drove through the narrow streets. "It's been a long time since I've had company at home." Upon arrival, Esperanza led Maximus through the courtyard, with its fountain covered by a thin layer of ice and the flower pots protected by burlap sacks. The colonial house, built at the end of the 18th century, had been carefully restored by Francisco over decades. Each room held memories of a life shared for almost 50 years. "This will be your space," Esperanza explained, showing Maximus a cozy corner in the living room, where she had improvised a bed with cushions and blankets. She placed water and food bowls nearby. "I know it's not what you're used to, but I promise to improve with time." Maximus explored the house cautiously, sniffing every corner as if mapping the territory. When he reached the master bedroom, he stopped in front of Francisco's photograph on the nightstand, observing it intently. "That was my husband," Esperanza explained, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Francisco. He passed away 3 years ago. It was also sudden, like your owner's accident." She paused, feeling emotion tightening her throat. "The difference is that I wasn't there when he needed me." Maximus approached, and to Esperanza's surprise, gently rested his head on her lap. The simple gesture of comfort caused the tears held back for so long to finally spill over. "Thank you," she whispered, stroking the soft fur of the animal. The following days established a new routine. In the morning, Esperanza took Maximus for a short walk around the neighborhood, noticing how people greeted her, something that hadn't happened in years when she had become merely Mr. Rodriguez's reclusive widow. Afterward, she prepared breakfast for both of them, surprising herself with the pleasure she felt in cooking again for someone besides herself. The afternoons were dedicated to visits to the hospital. Maximus had obtained special permission to briefly see Robert, who remained unconscious most of the time due to medication. In the brief moments of lucidity, Robert seemed confused to see Esperanza with his dog, but he was too weak to ask questions. In the evenings, Esperanza found herself doing something she hadn't done in a long time, talking. She told Maximus about her life with Francisco, about her distant daughter who lived in Austin, about the dreams she had abandoned, and the regrets she carried. "You know what's strange, Maximus? "I have the feeling that you really understand what I'm saying," she commented one night, while knitting in the living room armchair, another forgotten habit that was resurfacing. On the 5th day, something unexpected happened. Esperanza woke up feeling strangely dizzy. Her vision blurred momentarily, and her heart seemed to beat irregularly. "It's nothing," she muttered to herself, trying to get up, but her legs gave way, and she fell back onto the bed. Suddenly, Maximus was by her side, barking insistently. The dog ran to the nightstand where Esperanza kept her medications, and with his snout, pushed the bottle of blood pressure pills toward her. "How did you—" Esperanza took the bottle with trembling hands, swallowing a pill dry. Maximus stayed by her side, watching her intently until her color began to return to normal. Later that day, during the hospital visit, Esperanza recounted the incident to a nurse. "It doesn't surprise me," the professional commented. "Many police dogs are trained to detect physiological changes. Some can sense when a person is going to have a seizure or a heart attack even before the symptoms appear. But how did he know which medication?" Esperanza asked, still amazed. The nurse smiled. "Maybe he's just a very special dog." That night, while preparing chicken broth in the kitchen, the first recipe she had made in years, Esperanza reflected on how her life had changed dramatically in just 5 days. The house, once silent as a mausoleum, now had life again. She had bought fresh flowers for the dining room table, something she hadn't done since Francisco's death. She had called her daughter in Austin, surprising her with the call and the news. More importantly, she had reconnected with the outside world. Neighbors stopped to chat during walks with Maximus. The lady at the flower shop commented on how much younger Esperanza looked. Even Father Michael from St. Anthony's Parish, who for years had tried to convince her to return to church, was surprised to see her at Sunday service, with Maximus behaving politely by her side. "Who would say I needed a police dog to bring me back to life?" Esperanza murmured, serving some broth in a bowl for Maximus, who waited patiently. That's when the phone rang, the hospital number appearing on the screen. Esperanza answered with a racing heart. "Mrs. Rodriguez, this is Dr. Evelyn Carter in charge of Lieutenant Miller's case. He woke up completely today and is asking for his dog and for you." Maximus, as if understanding, perked up his ears and let out an enthusiastic bark. Esperanza smiled, feeling an emotion she hadn't experienced in a long time, a mixture of expectation and renewed purpose. "Tell him we'll be there tomorrow morning," she replied, hanging up the phone and turning to Maximus. "Your owner woke up, officer. I think it's time for a proper reunion, don't you think?" Maximus's joyful bark echoed through the house, as if it were the most eloquent answer possible. Dr. Evelyn Carter observed her patient with a mixture of professional interest and personal curiosity. Robert Miller was an intriguing case, not only because of the miracle of his survival under the rubble, but also because of the constantly tense expression on his face, even during medicated sleep. As a resident psychiatrist at UCLA Medical Center, Evelyn had learned to read people beyond their physical injuries, and something about Lieutenant Miller piqued her clinical interest. "Your tests are surprisingly good, considering the circumstances," she commented, checking her clipboard while Robert, now fully conscious, adjusted in the hospital bed. "When can I leave?" he asked, his voice still hoarse from disuse. "Always straight to the point, aren't you?" Evelyn smiled slightly. "At least 3 more days of observation. After that, a long recovery period at home." Robert frowned. "I can't be away for long. I have responsibilities." "Your responsibility now is to fully recover," Evelyn replied with professional firmness. "Besides, from what I understand, your partner is being very well cared for." At the mention of Maximus, Robert's eyes softened slightly. That woman, Esperanza. I barely know her. Why is she taking care of my dog? Maybe you should ask her. She'll be here in—" Evelyn checked her wristwatch. "About 20 minutes. As if on schedule, exactly 20 minutes later, a commotion was heard in the hallway. The unmistakable sound of paws against the vinyl floor and the voice of an elderly woman trying to control an excited dog. "Maximus, please behave. We're in a hospital." The door to the room opened and Maximus practically invaded the space, running directly to Robert's bed. The dog stopped inches from his owner, as if suddenly aware of his injuries, and let out a low, anxious whine. "It's okay, boy," Robert said, extending his unbandaged hand to pet the animal's head. "I'm okay." Esperanza entered behind, visibly excited and nervous. Her eyes met Robert's, and for a moment, both were silent, assessing each other. "Lieutenant Miller," Esperanza finally said, approaching the bed, "I'm glad to see you're awake." "Mrs. Rodriguez," Robert replied, his voice still weak, "I thank you for taking care of Maximus." "It was a pleasure," Esperanza smiled. "He's a wonderful companion." Evelyn watched the interaction with professional interest. There was something about the dynamic between these three, man, woman, and dog, that was fascinating, as if fate had intertwined their lives for some specific reason. "Well," said the doctor, breaking the moment, "I'll let you talk. Lieutenant, remember not to overexert yourself. I'll be back in an hour to check your vital signs." When Evelyn left, an awkward silence filled the room. Maximus, oblivious to the tension, had settled down next to Robert's bed, his head barely touching his owner's hand. "How did it happen?" Robert finally asked. "The accident? I don't remember much." Esperanza sat in the chair next to the bed. "I was looking out my window like every morning. I saw you and Maximus patrolling near the mansion under renovation. There was a roar, and part of the structure collapsed. When I arrived, Maximus was barking next to the rubble, protecting your arm that was sticking out." Robert nodded slowly, processing the information. A fragmented memory crossed his mind. Maximus alert, the sound of twisting metal and then darkness. "I owe you my life," he murmured, looking first at Maximus and then at Esperanza. "Both of you." "You don't owe me anything, Lieutenant," Esperanza replied softly. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Robert said, with a firmness that surprised both of them. "Not everyone would have gone out into the street before dawn, in the middle of winter, to investigate a collapse. Not everyone would have insisted on taking care of a police dog. You are extraordinary, Mrs. Rodriguez." Esperanza's cheeks flushed a soft pink, a blush she hadn't felt in decades. "I just did what my heart told me," she replied simply. Robert observed her more closely. In the morning light coming through the hospital window, he could see Esperanza's face clearly for the first time. The wrinkles that spoke of a long life, and surely not without pain, but also a spark in her eyes that suggested remarkable inner strength. "The doctor told me that you and Maximus have adapted well," he commented, trying to lighten the mood. Esperanza smiled broadly. "More than well. He saved my life, you know. I had a high blood pressure episode yesterday, and he knew exactly which medication I needed." Robert nodded, unsurprised. "He's trained to detect physiological changes, part of his training as a police service dog." "He's extraordinary," said Esperanza, looking affectionately at Maximus. "He's brought life back into my house. I hadn't realized how much I needed that." Something in the way she said it caught Robert's attention. There was an undercurrent of loneliness in her words that resonated deeply with him. "Do you live alone?" he asked, though he already suspected the answer. "Yes, for 3 years. My husband, Francisco, died of a heart attack. Since then I've lived, well, I don't know if living is the right word. I've existed, observing the world from my window." The words hit Robert with an unsettling familiarity. Wasn't that exactly what he himself had been doing? Existing, not living. Taking refuge in routine and duty to avoid facing the emptiness he had felt since Michael, his son, had distanced himself. "I understand," he said softly. "Sometimes it's easier to observe life than to participate in it." Esperanza looked at him surprised, as if she didn't expect that level of understanding. "Exactly," she nodded. "But Maximus has forced me to return to the world. This stubborn dog refuses to let me hide." Robert smiled, his first genuine smile in days. "Yes, he has that effect on people. It was the same with me. I was afraid of dogs, you know. A bite when I was a child. When I was assigned to the K9 unit, I wanted to refuse, but I had no choice. Now I can't imagine my life without him." Maximus, as if understanding that they were talking about him, lifted his head and looked at both of them with what almost seemed like pride. "I never thought I'd say this," Robert continued, "but I think this accident may have been a blessing in disguise. If it hadn't happened, we never would have met." The words escaped his lips before he could filter them, surprising both him and Esperanza. For a moment, silence filled the room again, but it was a different silence, warm, expectant. "Maybe some things happen for a reason," Esperanza finally replied, smiling shyly. Before Robert could respond, the door opened and Dr. Carter returned, accompanied by a young man Robert instantly recognized. "Dad!" Michael exclaimed, hurrying to the bed. Robert's eyes filled with tears at the sight of his son, whom he hadn't seen in almost 6 months. "Michael, how did you know?" "The station located me at the university," Michael explained, his face a mixture of worry and relief. "I took the first bus from New York City. Are you okay?" "When they told me a building had fallen on you." "I'm fine, son," Robert assured, squeezing Michael's hand. "Thanks to Maximus and Mrs. Rodriguez." Michael turned to Esperanza, noticing her for the first time. "You helped my father." "Your father saved himself," Esperanza replied modestly. "I was just in the right place at the right time." Dr. Carter, who had been watching silently, intervened. "Lieutenant Miller, I need to check your vital signs now. Perhaps Mrs. Rodriguez and Maximus could wait outside with your son." Robert nodded, but before Esperanza could get up, he took her hand. "You'll come back, right?" Esperanza felt warmth spread from her hand to her heart. "Of course," she promised. "Maximus and I will be here." As they left the room, Michael looked at Esperanza curiously. "I don't think I've ever seen my father like this before," he commented. "Connected, present." Esperanza smiled, absent-mindedly stroking Maximus's head. "Accidents have a way of reminding us what really matters." "Yes," Michael nodded thoughtfully. "I guess sometimes we need something to fall apart so we can rebuild." In the hospital cafeteria, while Michael told stories about his college life, Esperanza reflected on the chain of events that had brought them all together. A collapse, a loyal dog, a reunion between father and son, and a widow who had found a new purpose. The winter outside was still cold, but inside the hospital, something warm was beginning to bloom. An improbable connection between 4 beings who somehow seemed destined to meet. The days at UCLA Medical Center settled into their own rhythm. Every morning, Esperanza and Maximus arrived punctually at 10, carrying small treasures that transformed the sterile hospital room. Fresh flowers from the farmer's market, books from Francisco's personal library, and occasionally, sweet bread from Mrs. Teresa, who now prepared a special bag for the convalescing lieutenant and his squad. Michael had extended his stay in Santa Monica, postponing his return to college under the pretext that his father needed help. The truth, which everyone perceived but no one mentioned, was that father and son were taking advantage of this forced pause to rebuild their relationship. A week after the accident, Dr. Carter announced that Robert could be discharged in 2 days, on the condition that he follow a strict regime of rest and therapy. The news, which should have been received with joy, brought with it an unexpected wave of anxiety for Esperanza. "I suppose you'll return to your apartment," she commented casually, while helping Robert sort through the "Get Well Soon" cards that his colleagues from the station had sent. Robert, who could now sit up in bed without assistance, looked at her with an expression that was difficult to interpret. "It's the logical thing. Although Michael insists on staying a while to help me." Esperanza nodded, trying to hide her disapproval. Robert's apartment was small, on the 3rd floor without an elevator, with narrow stairs that would be a challenge for someone with a cast on his arm and fractured ribs. "My house has too many empty rooms," she said suddenly, surprising herself, "and it's already adapted for Maximus." Robert looked at her surprised. "Are you offering me?" "Only until you can take care of yourself," Esperanza hastened to clarify, feeling a telltale blush spread across her cheeks. "I have a bedroom on the ground floor next to the garden. It would be more practical for your recovery." Before Robert could respond, Michael entered the room, followed by Dr. Carter. Both caught the end of the conversation. "It's an excellent idea from a medical standpoint," interjected Evelyn, with a smile that suggested her thoughts went beyond the strictly professional. "The stairs in your apartment would be an unnecessary risk, Lieutenant." Michael looked alternately at his father and Esperanza, a slight smile forming on his lips. "Besides, it would be good for Maximus not to have to adapt to a new environment now." Robert found himself cornered by 3 expectant gazes. Even Maximus, from his place by the window, seemed to be waiting for his answer. "If it's not a bother for you, Mrs. Rodriguez," he began, trying to maintain a formal tone that contrasted with the warmth he felt in his chest. "Esperanza," she interrupted, "I think after everything we've been through, we can drop the formalities, don't you think, Robert?" The use of her first name, pronounced in that soft voice he had come to associate with comfort and security, sealed the agreement more effectively than any legal contract. "Esperanza," he repeated, savoring the name. "I accept your offer." Temporarily, of course. 2 days later, a small procession slowly made its way along the cobblestone streets of Santa Monica. Michael pushed the wheelchair in which Robert, reluctantly, had agreed to sit for the trip from the hospital to Esperanza's house. Maximus walked obediently beside them, occasionally looking back as if checking that everything was in order, and Esperanza led the group, her carved cane marking the rhythm on the cobblestones. Neighbors came out to their doors to greet them, curious about the unusual procession. For a small city like Santa Monica, Lieutenant Miller's accident and his miraculous rescue had become the talk of the town. Even more, the unexpected friendship between the strict police officer and the reclusive widow of the respected Francisco Rodriguez had sparked an interest that ranged from genuine joy to inevitable small-town gossip. Upon arriving at the colonial house, Maximus ran ahead, as if wanting to make sure everything was ready to receive his owner. Esperanza opened the front door, revealing the courtyard where the fountain now flowed freely, freed from the winter ice thanks to a slight rise in temperature. "Welcome to Casa Rodriguez," Esperanza said with a mixture of pride and nervousness. "I hope you're comfortable." Robert observed the space with admiration. The house was much larger than he had imagined, a true colonial treasure, with stone arches, whitewashed walls, and terracotta floors polished by decades of use. Potted plants of various sizes added life and color, while bougainvillea climbed the courtyard columns, its fuchsia flowers contrasting with the white of the walls. "It's beautiful," he commented sincerely, as Michael helped him move from the wheelchair to a stone bench by the fountain. "It's been in Francisco's family for 4 generations, Esperanza explained. "He dedicated years to restoring it." Michael, who had been watching silently, interjected, "It reminds me of Grandma's house in Taos. Dad, do you remember how you always said you'd have a house like this someday?" Robert nodded, a nostalgic smile crossing his face. "Your grandmother loved old houses. She said they had a soul." "And she was right," Esperanza affirmed. "This house has witnessed joys and sorrows, births and farewells. Sometimes when I'm alone, I seem to hear echoes of laughter or conversations from times past." She stopped abruptly, fearing she sounded too sentimental, or worse, a little crazy. To her surprise, Robert looked at her with understanding. "I understand perfectly," he said. "My grandmother said something similar about the old buildings in the square, that they kept the whispers of everyone who had passed through there." A moment of shared silence settled between them, broken only by the constant murmur of the water in the fountain and the occasional distant bark of a neighborhood dog, to which Maximus responded with an attentive twitch of his ears. "Well," Esperanza finally said, resuming her role as hostess, "let me show you your room. Michael, could you help us?" The room intended for Robert exceeded all his expectations. Spacious and bright, with a large bed covered with a hand-woven quilt, an antique desk by the window overlooking the back garden, and a small library in a corner. Next to the bed, a new padded basket, evidently bought for Maximus, although Robert suspected the dog would continue to prefer sleeping as close to him as possible. "It was Francisco's favorite guest room," Esperanza explained. "He used to say it had the best light for reading in the morning." Robert noticed a curious detail. On the nightstand, a framed photograph of a middle-aged man with a kind smile and eyes that seemed full of wisdom. The image was surrounded by small, dried flowers, like a minimalist altar. "Francisco," Esperanza explained, following his gaze. "I hope you don't mind. I can remove it if you prefer." "Of course not," Robert replied quickly. "It's your house, Esperanza. Besides, I'd like to know more about him. He seems to have been an exceptional man." Esperanza's eyes lit up. He was. An architect by profession, a poet at heart. He restored historic buildings, but he also rebuilt the spirits of the people around him. He had a gift for seeing beauty where others only saw ruins. The description resonated deeply with Robert. He, who considered himself a practical man and not given to sentimentality, found himself wishing he had known Francisco Rodriguez. "And you?" he asked, genuinely interested. "What did you do before becoming a reclusive widow?" Esperanza completed with surprising self-irony. "I was a literature teacher at the local high school. I retired a year before Francisco passed away. We planned to travel, to see all those places we had read about together." Her voice trailed off and a heavy silence filled the room. Michael, sensing the tension, diplomatically intervened. "Dad, you should rest a bit. The doctor said not to overexert yourself on the first day." Robert nodded, grateful for the interruption. "You're right, it's been an intense day." "We'll leave you to settle in," Esperanza said, regaining her composure. Dinner will be at 7, but if you need anything before, just call me. There's a bell next to the bed." When Esperanza and Michael left, Robert carefully lay down on the bed, aware of every twinge of pain in his ribs. Maximus agilely jumped beside him, settling into a space that seemed to have been specifically designed not to disturb his owner's wounds. "What do you think, partner?" Robert murmured, stroking the dog's ears. "It seems our lives have taken an unexpected turn." Maximus responded by resting his head on Robert's leg, his expressive eyes fixed on his face, as if trying to communicate a canine wisdom that transcended words. From the open window came the voices of Michael and Esperanza talking in the garden. Robert couldn't distinguish the exact words, but the warm tone and occasional bursts of laughter gave him a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in years. He closed his eyes, allowing himself to enjoy the present moment, without worrying about protocols, pending reports, or the expectations of others. For the first time since the accident, or perhaps long before, Robert Miller allowed himself simply to be, instead of to do. And in that state of serene reception, something within him began to slowly thaw, like the first buds emerging after a long winter. The February sun slanted in through the window, creating golden patterns on the terracotta floor. Robert, sitting in the armchair in the back garden of Esperanza's house, watched the slow awakening of nature with a mixture of wonder and gratitude. 3 weeks had passed since he left the hospital, and each day brought small victories. Today he had managed to dress completely without help, an achievement he silently celebrated. Maximus dozed at his feet, occasionally opening an eye to check that everything was in order, before returning to his morning nap. The dog had adapted perfectly to the new routine, dividing his loyalty between Robert and Esperanza in a way that sometimes caused Robert an irrational pang of jealousy. After all, for 2 years he had been solely his. "Good morning," Esperanza greeted, appearing with a tray containing coffee, freshly baked bread, and fresh fruit. "How are you feeling today?" "Better," Robert replied, helping her place the tray on the garden table. "I barely felt any pain lifting my left arm." Esperanza smiled, pleased. "The rehabilitation is working. Evelyn will be satisfied when she comes to check on you." Dr. Carter had insisted on making weekly home visits, an attention that went beyond the usual protocol. Robert suspected that her professional interest was mixed with a genuine curiosity about the peculiar dynamic that had developed at Casa Rodriguez. "Did Michael already leave?" he asked, noticing the absence of his son, who usually joined them for breakfast. Esperanza nodded as she poured the coffee. "He left early, said something about a meeting at the station." Robert frowned, intrigued. Michael had shown a growing interest in police work, spending hours with Robert's colleagues, listening to stories and asking questions that revealed a curiosity beyond simple filial courtesy. "I hope he's not considering," he began, but stopped, aware that he was about to express the same automatic rejection that had caused the distance between them in the first place. "Following in your footsteps?" Esperanza completed, with an insight Robert had come to appreciate. "Would that be so terrible?" Robert sighed, contemplating his coffee. "It's dangerous, Esperanza. You saw what happened to me, and I was just doing a routine patrol." "Life is dangerous, Robert," she replied softly. "It can collapse on you at any moment, even when you're just going to the store to buy bread." Her voice cracked slightly, and Robert knew she was thinking of Francisco. "I'm sorry," he said, impulsively taking her hand. "You're right, of course. It's just that I always wanted something different for him. Safer. More predictable," Esperanza suggested. "Like your life was before the accident?" The question touched a raw nerve. His previous life, organized, controlled, solitary, now seemed strangely empty. The weeks at Casa Rodriguez had revealed a dimension of existence he had forgotten, the comfort of evening conversations by the fire, shared laughter over trivial anecdotes, the simple joy of having someone waiting for your return. "Not everything was bad," he weakly defended. "I had my routine, my responsibilities, and a son who barely spoke to you," Esperanza added with gentle frankness. "An apartment where you returned alone every night. A life that protected you from pain, but also from joy." Robert looked at her, surprised. "You seem to know me better than I know myself." "I recognize the pattern," she smiled sadly. "I did the same after losing Francisco. I built myself a small fortress of solitude, convincing myself that I was protecting my heart. In reality, I was simply avoiding living." Maximus, as if sensing the intensity of the conversation, got up and rested his head on Robert's knee, looking at him with that expression that seemed to contain all the wisdom in the world. "And now?" Robert asked, automatically stroking the dog. "Do you think you're living again?" Esperanza looked out at the garden, where the first flowers of the season were beginning to timidly open. "I'm learning to. A little more each day." She turned her eyes to him. "And you?" The question hung between them, laden with unspoken meanings. Before Robert could answer, the doorbell interrupted the moment. "That must be Evelyn," Esperanza said, hastily getting up, an expression that could be interpreted as relief crossing her face. Robert remained alone in the garden, the question still echoing in his mind. Was he living again? Or simply occupying a temporary space in Esperanza's life, waiting to return to his controlled and predictable existence? Maximus whimpered softly, as if he could read his thoughts. Robert smiled at the dog, scratching behind his ears. "You've always known what's important, haven't you, buddy?" The approaching voices of Esperanza and Evelyn interrupted his reflection. "Doctor." Carter entered the garden with her usual contained energy, carrying her medical bag, and an expression that oscillated between professionalism and an almost youthful enthusiasm. "Lieutenant Miller," she greeted formally, although she had started calling him Robert in their conversations weeks ago. "How is our favorite patient feeling today?" The medical examination was brief but thorough. Evelyn checked the mobility of his previously fractured arm, verified the healing of minor wounds, and listened to his breathing to make sure his ribs were healing correctly. "Impressive," she finally declared, putting away her stethoscope. "Your recovery is progressing much faster than expected. I'd say the environment has been extremely beneficial." The look she exchanged with Esperanza didn't go unnoticed by Robert. During the last few weeks, he had observed how the two women were developing a friendship based on mutual respect and, he suspected, a shared interest in his well-being that went beyond the strictly medical or charitable. "Does that mean I can soon return to work?" he asked, more out of habit than genuine desire. Evelyn looked at him with a mixture of amusement and clinical assessment. "Administrative work, perhaps, in a week. Active patrols not before a month, and provided you continue with physical therapy." Robert nodded, surprised to discover that the news produced neither the impatience nor the relief he had anticipated. The idea of returning to his previous routine, to his solitary apartment, felt strangely wrong. "In fact," Evelyn continued, sitting down next to them and accepting the cup of coffee that Esperanza offered her, "I have news that might interest you professionally." Robert and Esperanza exchanged a look of curiosity. "The mayor is pushing for the creation of a full canine unit inspired by Maximus's heroism," Evelyn explained. "They're looking for someone with experience to lead it. Your name has been mentioned prominently, Lieutenant." "A full K9 unit? In Santa Monica?" Robert was genuinely surprised. The small coastal city rarely innovated in matters of security, preferring to maintain a discreet police presence so as not to alter its tourist image. "The accident generated a lot of media attention," Evelyn explained. "The story of the brave police dog and his owner trapped under the rubble made it to national newspapers. The mayor saw an opportunity to modernize the force and improve its public image simultaneously." "Politics," Robert murmured with some disdain. "Pragmatism," Evelyn corrected. "And a unique opportunity for you. Leading the unit would mean less street patrols and more training and supervision work. Less physical risk, more administrative responsibility." Robert looked at Maximus, who had raised his head upon hearing the conversation, as if understanding the opportunity that presented itself. "I haven't said I'm interested," he finally said, although something in his tone suggested otherwise. "Besides, my recovery isn't complete yet." "Of course," Evelyn nodded. "I just wanted you to know. The training center would be established on the outskirts of the city, on municipal land that's currently unused. Construction would begin in the spring." "The outskirts?" Esperanza asked suddenly. "Near the old Rancho de los Reyes?" Evelyn looked at her surprised. "Exactly there, how did you know?" An enigmatic smile crossed Esperanza's face. "Francisco did the restoration studies for that property years ago. He always said it would be perfect for a community project, with all that open space and the historic structures that could be rehabilitated." Robert observed Esperanza with renewed interest. Despite weeks of living under the same roof, he discovered new facets of this woman whom he had initially categorized simply as the kind widow who took care of my dog every day. "It seems fate has its own plans," Evelyn commented, with a meaningful look that included both of them. Before the conversation could continue, the garden gate opened and Michael entered hurriedly, his face lit up with barely contained excitement. "Dad! Esperanza!" he exclaimed, before noticing Evelyn's presence. "Oh, Doctor, excuse the interruption." "No problem," Evelyn smiled. "In fact, I've finished the medical checkup. Your father is progressing admirably." Michael nodded distractedly, too focused on his own news to fully process the information. "I have something to tell you. I just came from the station and—" He stopped, looking at his father with a mixture of apprehension and determination. Robert recognized that expression. It was the same one Michael had shown at 12 when he announced he wanted to study art instead of following the safe path of science his father preferred. The same stubborn determination he had inherited from his mother. "Go ahead, son," he encouraged, preparing himself internally for what was to come. "They've offered me a position as an administrative assistant in the new K9 unit project," Michael blurted out. "It's a part-time position that I can combine with my distance learning studies. I've already spoken to the university, and they'll allow me to transfer the credits." A tense silence followed the announcement. Robert felt conflicting emotions colliding within him. Pride, concern, irritation at not having been consulted, and an unexpected relief to know that his son would be nearby. "Aren't you going to say anything?" Michael finally asked, his initial confidence fading before his father's silence. Robert looked at Esperanza, subconsciously seeking her reaction. She returned a serene gaze, silently communicating her support without influencing his decision. "Is this what you really want, Michael?" Robert finally asked. "Isn't it just a reaction to the accident?" Michael seemed surprised by the question, clearly expecting a more direct refusal. "I've been thinking about it since before, Dad. The law career, it doesn't fulfill me. I've always admired your work, even if I didn't always agree with your methods." "My methods?" Robert raised an eyebrow. "Your rigidity, your obsession with rules," Michael explained, but without the accusatory tone he would have used months ago. "But seeing you here these days, getting along with Esperanza, with Maximus, you've shown me another side, and I think I can combine the best of both worlds, your sense of duty and my own vision of service." The words struck Robert with unexpected force. Had his son really seen a change in him? Had his transformation been so evident? "The K9 unit project will need both discipline and creativity," Michael continued, taking advantage of his father's thoughtful silence. "Especially if you decide to lead it." Robert looked at Evelyn, who was smiling discreetly. "Did you know about this?" "I found out this morning," the doctor admitted, "but I considered that it was Michael who should tell you." Maximus, as if wanting to participate in the family discussion, approached Michael and gently nudged his hand with his snout. The young man knelt down, petting the dog. "Even Maximus agrees," he joked, but his eyes remained fixed on his father, waiting for an answer. Robert slowly got up, aware that everyone was watching his movements. He walked to the edge of the garden, where an old bougainvillea climbed the wall, its flowers creating a cascade of magenta. Francisco had planted it, Esperanza had told him, when they bought the house, promising that someday it would cover the entire wall. A promise fulfilled beyond his time on Earth. "Life rarely follows the paths we plan," he finally said, turning to his son. "Sometimes it collapses on us when we least expect it. Other times it flourishes in places where we don't plant seeds." Michael looked at him expectantly, trying to decipher the meaning behind his father's unusually poetic words. "If that's what you really want," Robert continued, "I won't oppose it. In fact, I'm proud of you." Michael's expression transformed from apprehension to surprise, and finally to genuine joy. He approached his father, and carefully so as not to hurt his still recovering ribs, briefly hugged him. "Thank you, Dad," he murmured. Esperanza watched the scene with wet eyes, remembering similar moments with her own daughter, who now lived far away. Evelyn, discreetly moved, began to gather her medical equipment. "I think my work here is done," she commented, with a double meaning that didn't go unnoticed by anyone. "I'll see you next week. And Lieutenant, think about that offer. Rarely does life present us with opportunities so aligned with our true needs." When Evelyn left, a new silence filled the garden, but it was a different silence, expectant, charged with possibilities instead of unresolved tensions. "So," Esperanza finally said, getting up to collect the coffee cups, "it seems we'll have a lot to celebrate tonight. I'll prepare something special for dinner." "Let me help you," Michael offered, following her into the kitchen, not without first casting a last meaningful look at his father. Robert remained alone in the garden with Maximus, feeling how the pieces of his life, so carefully ordered before the accident, were now rearranging themselves into a completely new pattern. And surprisingly, he didn't feel fear at this change, but a strange peace. "What do you think, partner?" he asked Maximus, who was watching him attentively. "Should we accept this new challenge?" The dog tilted his head, as if seriously considering the question, before barking once decisively. Robert smiled. "I'll take that as a yes." That night, during a dinner that extended beyond the usual, full of conversation and plans for the future, Robert watched Esperanza and Michael interact as if they had known each other all their lives. The house, which initially had seemed too large and full of unfamiliar memories, now felt strangely like home. And as Maximus dozed contentedly under the table, occasionally accepting discreetly offered morsels from Michael, Robert understood that the collapse that had almost cost him his life had been, paradoxically, the event that had allowed him to rebuild himself from the foundations. Spring arrived in Santa Monica with an explosion of color and fragrance. Gardens bloomed profusely, jacarandas painted the sky lilac, and tourists returned in greater numbers, filling the squares and alleys with renewed bustle. Robert, fully recovered physically, had returned to work 3 weeks earlier, albeit in a modified role. He now divided his time between administrative tasks at the station and preparatory meetings for the new K9 training center, whose construction was progressing rapidly on the grounds of the old Rancho de los Reyes. However, he hadn't returned to his apartment. What began as a temporary arrangement during his convalescence had silently transformed into something permanent, although none of those involved had named this new situation. His belongings had gradually migrated from the small apartment to the room at Casa Rodriguez, and the apartment was now officially for rent. That April morning, Robert left early for his daily walk with Maximus. Unlike his former official patrols, these morning walks had a completely different character. They were moments of reflection and connection with the city he now saw with new eyes. He no longer looked for infractions or potential threats, but observed details that had previously gone unnoticed. The intricate carving on a colonial doorway, the lively conversations of vendors setting up their stalls, the play of light and shadow on the old cobblestones. "Good morning, Lieutenant," Mrs. Teresa greeted from the door of her bakery. "The usual for you and Mrs. Rodriguez?" "And something extra today," Robert replied with a smile. "Her daughter is coming to visit." The news that Lucia, Esperanza's daughter, would be coming from Austin had caused great excitement at Casa Rodriguez. During the previous week, Esperanza had been obsessively cleaning, rearranging furniture, and cooking her daughter's favorite dishes to freeze and have them ready. "An interesting situation," commented Mrs. Teresa as she packed the freshly baked sweetbread and conchas. "The daughter who hasn't visited in years finally decides to come just when you've moved into her mother's house." Robert felt a slight blush on his cheeks. Despite the months that had passed, he still hadn't gotten used to the direct way the neighbors addressed his relationship with Esperanza. "It's a coincidence of dates," he replied diplomatically. "Lucia had planned vacations and—" "Of course, Lieutenant," Mrs. Teresa smiled, handing him the package. "Just coincidences. Like you never returning to your apartment, or Mrs. Rodriguez singing again while doing laundry, something she hasn't done since Mr. Rodriguez passed away." Maximus, apparently tired of the human conversation, gently tugged on the leash. "My partner reminds me that we have a schedule to keep," Robert said, grateful for the canine interruption. "Thank you, Mrs. Teresa." As they walked away, Robert reflected on the baker's words. Did Esperanza now sing while doing housework? He had never heard her, although, come to think of it, he'd been spending less time at home lately, busy with preparations for the training center. The relationship he had developed with Esperanza defied conventional definitions. They weren't simply friends, nor housemates, nor a romantic couple in the traditional sense. There was a comfortable intimacy between them, based on mutual respect and a deep understanding of the wounds each carried. They shared breakfasts and dinners, discussed books and movies, occasionally brushed hands when passing an object, but nothing more had happened. Sometimes Robert wondered if Esperanza felt the same unresolved tension that he experienced at certain moments, like when he found her in the garden at sunset, the golden light illuminating her profile as she read, or when their gazes crossed over some comment from Michael that inadvertently positioned them as a unit. "I'm overthinking, right?" he murmured to Maximus, who looked at him with what seemed to be amused canine condescension. Upon reaching the main square, Robert stopped to allow Maximus to drink water from one of the public fountains. While waiting, his attention was captured by a woman getting out of a taxi in front of the city's most elegant boutique hotel. She wore sunglasses, a simple but obviously expensive dress, and observed the surrounding buildings with the caution typical of someone returning to a familiar but changed place. Something about her posture, the way she slightly tilted her head, struck him as immediately familiar. The woman, as if sensing his gaze, turned in his direction. Even from a distance and with dark glasses, Robert instantly knew who it was. Lucia, he murmured, surprised. The resemblance to Esperanza was evident, although Lucia was about 40 years younger and her posture lacked her mother's natural warmth. Before he could decide whether or not to approach, Maximus solved the dilemma, pulling on the leash in the direction of the newcomer, apparently recognizing the kinship by smell. "Maximus, stay," Robert ordered, but the dog, normally obedient, seemed to have his own ideas about family protocol. Lucia watched with increasing alarm as the large German shepherd approached her resolutely. She instinctively stepped back, bumping into her suitcase. "Don't worry," Robert reassured her, reaching them. "He's completely friendly. He's just greeting you." Lucia looked alternately at the dog and the man, her expression shifting from fear to confusion and finally to understanding. "You must be Lieutenant Miller," she said, in a tone that mixed professional courtesy and personal assessment. "My mother's housemate." The way she pronounced housemate carried a load of unasked questions. "Robert, please," he replied, extending his hand. "And yes, I have the privilege of sharing a home with your mother. We were just heading home. Esperanza is very excited about your visit, although we expected you later." "I took an earlier flight," Lucia explained, briefly accepting his hand. "I thought I'd check into the hotel first, freshen up a little, and then surprise her." Robert noticed the detail. Hotel, not the family home. A revealing choice. "I can wait for her if you prefer to continue with your original plan," he offered diplomatically. Lucia observed Maximus, who was now sitting patiently but kept his intelligent eyes fixed on her, as if assessing this new member of the family circle. "Is this the famous hero dog?" she asked, slightly changing the subject. "The same," Robert confirmed proudly. "Maximus, greet Lucia, Esperanza's daughter." To his surprise, Maximus politely extended a paw. The gesture, which they had recently practiced as part of the demonstrations for the new training center, elicited a genuine smile from Lucia, the first since their encounter. "Impressive," she commented, crouching slightly to shake the offered paw. "Mom has written a lot about him in her emails, almost as much as about you." Robert was curious about exactly what Esperanza had shared with her daughter, but he maintained his neutral expression. "So?" he asked, pointing alternately toward the hotel and toward the direction of Casa Rodriguez. "Do you prefer to check in first, or come with us directly?" Lucia seemed to consider her options, looking at her suitcase and then at the dog, who continued to watch her with canine expectation. "I guess I've already postponed this visit long enough," she finally said. "If you don't mind helping me with my suitcase, we could go straight there." Robert nodded, taking the luggage with ease. The trio walked along the cobblestone streets of Santa Monica, forming an image that attracted more than one curious glance. The police lieutenant with his characteristic upright bearing, the elegant visitor from out of town, and the famous hero dog walking like a peculiar family unit. "So," Lucia began after a few blocks of silence, "how is my mother really doing? Her emails are always positive, but knowing Mom, she's better than she's been in a long time," Robert replied honestly. "She's reconnected with old friends, participates in the Historical Theatre Restoration Committee, and is even considering giving some literature classes at the Cultural Center." Lucia looked at him with genuine surprise. "Mom going back to teaching? She left the classroom when Dad got sick and never wanted to return, not even as a volunteer." "People change," Robert commented simply. "Sometimes we need a push from fate to remember who we really are, or someone who sees us as we really are," Lucia added, with an assessing look that eerily reminded him of Esperanza. Before the conversation could deepen, they reached the corner of Ocean View Drive. Esperanza's colonial house, with its freshly painted warm ochre facade and its overflowing geranium pots, stood invitingly in the morning sun. "Nothing has changed," Lucia murmured, stopping momentarily. "And yet it feels different." Robert understood the feeling perfectly. The physical house was the same, but the energy emanating from it had subtly changed in recent months. Less a museum of memories and more a living home. Maximus, sensing that they were approaching home, began to gently tug on the leash, eager to complete his morning routine, which included receiving a treat from Esperanza after the walk. Upon reaching the front door, Robert stopped, taking out his keys. The everyday gesture suddenly took on a different meaning under Lucia's watchful gaze. "Go ahead," he said, opening the door and letting Lucia enter first. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee and warm bread filled the courtyard. From the kitchen, Esperanza's voice floated melodically, softly singing an old ranchera song that Francisco used to hum while working in the garden. Lucia stopped abruptly, visibly affected by the scene. Robert understood. The Esperanza he had left behind 3 years ago, immersed in silence and depression after Francisco's death, was radically different from the woman who was now singing happily in her kitchen. "Mom," she finally called, her voice slightly trembling. The singing stopped instantly. A moment later, Esperanza appeared in the kitchen doorway, still holding a whisk, her face a mixture of shock and overflowing joy. "Lucia, my girl," she exclaimed, dropping the utensil and hurrying toward her daughter with open arms. Robert and Maximus discreetly retreated to the back garden, giving mother and daughter the space they needed for their reunion. As they walked away, Robert heard fragments of excited conversation, hurried questions, and the unmistakable sound of tears mixed with laughter. "Mission accomplished, partner," he murmured to Maximus, who responded with a satisfied wag of his tail. "Let's give them a moment." In the garden, Robert sat on the bench under the large avocado tree that provided generous shade. The last few months had brought changes to the outdoor space as well. New flower beds with aromatic herbs that Esperanza used in her kitchen, an area specifically dedicated to Maximus's training, and a corner with 2 comfortable chairs where he and Esperanza sometimes shared a glass of wine in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing. Maximus lay down at his feet, seemingly satisfied with the new addition to their strange extended family. Robert absent-mindedly stroked his ears, thinking about the complexity of human relationships, how life's accidents could separate a mother and daughter for years, and how other accidents, equally random, could unite people with no previous connection. Almost an hour later, Esperanza appeared in the doorway connecting the house to the garden. Her eyes were slightly reddened, but her face radiated a happiness that made her look years younger. "There are my 2 favorite men," she said, approaching. "Lucia is settling into her old room. She's staying here, not at the hotel." "I'm glad," Robert replied sincerely. "Everything all right?" Esperanza nodded, sitting down next to him on the bench. "Better than I expected. We've talked more in this hour than in the last 3 years together." She paused, looking directly at him. "Lucia says she recognized you immediately. Something about the way you describe yourself in my letters." Robert felt a slight warmth in his cheeks. "And what exactly do you say about me in those letters, if I may ask?" Esperanza smiled mysteriously. "That, Lieutenant Miller, is classified information between mother and daughter." Before he could playfully insist, Lucia appeared in the garden doorway. She had changed from her elegant travel dress into jeans and a simple blouse, and had pulled her hair back into a casual ponytail that made her look much younger and, curiously, more like Esperanza. "So, this is where the magic happens," she commented, observing the spacious garden. "Mom was telling me about your training sessions with Maximus." "Nothing sophisticated," Robert replied, rising to his feet out of courtesy. "We just keep his skills active while the official center is being built." "I'd love to see a demonstration," Lucia said, cautiously approaching Maximus, who was watching her with interest. "If it's not a bother, of course." Robert exchanged a look with Esperanza, who nodded enthusiastically. "Of course," he agreed, taking from his pocket the special small whistle he used for advanced commands. "Maximus, position." The German shepherd immediately stood up, assuming a position of attention in front of Robert, his gaze intense and focused. For the next 15 minutes, Robert guided Maximus through a series of advanced commands, detection of hidden objects, tracking specific trails through the garden, and even a demonstration of how he could respond differently depending on the person giving the orders, obeying only those he knew as authorized. "Impressive," Lucia commented when they finally finished. "And you say you'll train more dogs like him at the new center?" "That's the plan," Robert confirmed. "Maximus will be something like the role model, the experienced veteran who will help train the new generation. Esperanza, who had been watching with evident pride, interjected, "We should show her the construction site. It's only a 20-minute walk and it's a pleasant route." "I'd love to see it," Lucia replied, surprising both of them with her enthusiasm. "In fact, I have some questions about the project. In Austin, I run an animal-assisted therapy program for children with trauma, and I've been thinking of expanding it." Robert and Esperanza exchanged surprised glances. In all their conversations, Esperanza had never mentioned that her daughter worked with therapeutic animals. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Esperanza asked, genuinely confused. Lucia shrugged slightly. "I started just a year ago, and our conversations were so superficial. It never seemed like the right time to go into detail." An uncomfortable silence followed the observation, laden with years of truncated communication and lost opportunities. "Well," Robert finally said, breaking the tension, "it seems we have a lot to talk about during our walk. And I think Maximus would be delighted to learn more about his potential as a therapist." The dog, upon hearing his name, barked once as if confirming the suggestion. The three people laughed, and the tension dissipated as quickly as it had arisen. As they prepared for their excursion, Robert observed mother and daughter interacting with a naturalness that would surely have been impossible months before. Fate, that capricious architect of meaningful coincidences, seemed to be weaving a network of connections that transcended the simple accident that had started it all. And at the center of this network, moving the threads with his loyal presence and his infallible instinct, was Maximus, the furry catalyst who, unknowingly, had triggered a cascade of transformations in everyone around him. The June sun shone brightly on the grounds of the old Rancho de los Reyes, now transformed into the brand-new Canine Training Center of Santa Monica. The carefully restored historic structures blended harmoniously with the new facilities designed specifically for the training and care of police dogs. Robert, dressed in his formal uniform, watched with a mixture of pride and nervousness as the guests took their seats in the chairs arranged in the central courtyard for the inaugural ceremony. Municipal officials, state security representatives, journalists, and many ordinary citizens who had followed the project's development with interest settled under the tents that provided shade from the summer heat. "Everything is ready, Dad," Michael reported, approaching with a tablet where he was checking the final checklist. His son, who now combined his university studies with his role as administrative assistant at the center, had become a fundamental part of the project. "The dogs are ready for the demonstration. The technical team confirmed that the sound system works perfectly, and the mayor has just arrived." Robert nodded, unnecessarily adjusting his tie. "And Esperanza?" Michael smiled at the predictable question. In the back garden with Maximus and Lucia, going over the special demonstration routine one last time. The special demonstration had been Lucia's idea. During her visit, which had extended from a planned week to almost a full month, she had worked closely with Robert and Esperanza to develop a pilot program that combined Maximus's police techniques with therapeutic applications. The preliminary results with some children from the community center had been so promising that they were now officially part of the inauguration. "I'd better go check," Robert said, although everyone knew his concern had less to do with Maximus's preparation, impeccable as always, and more with his desire to see Esperanza before the ceremony. As he walked toward the back garden, Robert reflected on the extraordinary 6 months that had passed since the accident. What had begun as a near-fatal collapse had transformed into the reconstruction of his entire life. The renewed relationship with his son, the creation of the center he now directed, and above all, the special bond with Esperanza, which had gradually blossomed from gratitude to friendship, and finally to something deeper and more complex. They still hadn't officially named their relationship. Sometimes they joked that they were life partners through Maximus, a description that, although imprecise, captured the essence of how fate had united them through the brave German shepherd. Rounding the corner toward the back garden, Robert stopped, captivated by the scene. Esperanza, dressed in an elegant blue dress she had bought especially for the occasion, knelt beside Maximus, adjusting the ceremonial vest that proudly displayed the new Canine Training Center emblem. Lucia, who had returned from Austin specifically for the inauguration, was filming with her phone while giving instructions. "You have to look directly at the camera when Mom says, 'Service, Maximus,'" Lucia explained, with a professional seriousness that contrasted with the situation. The children need to see your eyes to connect emotionally. To Robert's surprise, Maximus seemed to understand perfectly, modifying his posture and directing his intelligent gaze to the indicated point.
Esperanza was the first to notice his presence. Robert, she smiled, standing up. Natural grace he had come to admire. Most of your party approach. Make sure everything was ready here. He hesitated briefly before continuing. The official chaos began. Lucia exchanged a knowing look with Maximus. I think we need to check the lighting on the main stage, she announced transparently.
Come on, K9 officer. Let's leave these two alone for a moment. When they were alone, Robert gently took Esperanza's hands. For months, they had danced around the unspoken limits of their relationship, mutually respecting the ghosts of the past that each carried. You're beautiful, he said simply. And you're nervous, she replied, adjusting his tie, which didn't really need adjustment. Everything will go perfectly. You've worked tirelessly for this day. We all have, Robert corrected. This center is as much yours as mine. Without you, without your support and vision, it would never have happened. Esperanza smiled, her eyes shining with a mixture of emotion and something deeper that Robert had learned to recognize over the past few months. I have something for you, she said suddenly, taking a small velvet box from her jacket pocket. I wanted to give it to you before the ceremony. Robert looked at the box with surprise. Esperanza, it's not what you think, she clarified quickly, although a telltale blush colored her cheeks. Well, not exactly. She opened the box, revealing an antique key, beautifully ornamented, attached to a silver keychain engraved with the initials RMEF. It's a ceremonial key to the house, she explained. I had it made based on the original lock design. The initials are... She stopped, suddenly unsure. Robert Miller and Esperanza Rodriguez, she completed softly, taking the key with slightly trembling fingers. It's beautiful. I wanted you to have something tangible, a symbol that, well, that I'm no longer staying at your house. If you agree, it's our home now. Together. It was the most explicit statement either of them had made about their relationship. For months they had shared breakfasts, walks, deep conversations late into the night, and even a tentative kiss under the bougainvillea in the courtyard. But they had never put into words what they both felt, that they had found, in the twilight of their lives, a new opportunity to love. Robert Miller, Esperanza finally said with a firmness that contrasted with the moisture in her eyes. For a man so brave in his work, it's taken you a long time to make official what everyone in Santa Monica has known for months. Robert laughed softly, the relief evident on his face. Is that a yes? In response, Esperanza leaned in and kissed him softly on the lips, a simple gesture but laden with promise. It's about time. The moment was interrupted by the sound of discreet applause. Both turned to find Michael, Lucia, and Dr. Carter watching them from the garden entrance, with expressions ranging from satisfaction to frank delight. I told you today would be the day, Carmela commented, extending her hand towards Michael, who with feigned resignation handed her some bills. The doctor always wins her bets. Were you betting on us? Robert asked, torn between indignation and amusement. All of Santa Monica was betting on you too, Dad, Michael replied, shrugging. Only we had inside information. Before the conversation could continue, the loudspeaker system came to life, announcing that the inaugural ceremony would begin in 5 minutes. Official reality returned abruptly, reminding everyone of the day's purpose. We'd better take our seats, Robert said, offering his arm to Esperanza in a formal gesture that contradicted the intimacy of the previous moment. As the group headed toward the main courtyard, Maximus walked proudly among them, his posture reflecting the dignity of the historical moment. To any casual observer, they seemed simply a professional team heading to an official ceremony. But to those who knew their story, Evelyn, the neighbors, the officers from the station, they were much more, a family assembled by fate, united by bonds forged in adversity, and strengthened by love and mutual respect. The ceremony proceeded with the expected pomp of an official event. The mayor delivered a speech on innovation in public safety. State officials praised the pioneering initiative, and Robert, in his role as director of the center, explained the program's vision and methodology. But the real highlight came when Esperanza and Maximus took the stage for the special demonstration. With a confidence that surprised even those who knew her well, Esperanza explained how service dogs could not only protect the community from external threats, but also heal internal wounds. Maximus taught me that even after the deepest losses, it's possible to rebuild, she said, her clear and firm voice reaching the last row of seats. "When I lost my husband Francisco, I thought my life was over. I locked myself in my house and in my grief, watching the world from my window without really participating in it. Absolute silence reigned among the attendees. Even the officials, normally distracted during these events, listened attentively. Then, one winter morning, a collapse changed everything. A loyal dog refused to abandon his fallen partner, and I found myself following his example of courage and loyalty. Without knowing it, by helping Maximus and Lieutenant Miller, I was helping myself to return to the world. Maximus, as if understanding the solemnity of the moment, remained perfectly still beside her, his gaze attentive and dignified. This center isn't just about training dogs to serve the community," Esperanza continued. "It's about recognizing the deep connection that exists between humans and animals, and how that connection can transform us all. Dogs like Maximus teach us fundamental lessons: unwavering loyalty, unconditional love, and the ability to live fully in the present moment." As Esperanza concluded her speech, Robert watched her with pride from his front row seat. The contrast between the shy and withdrawn woman he had met 6 months ago and the confident and eloquent figure who now captivated the audience was astounding. But it wasn't really a transformation, Robert understood, but a rebirth. The rediscovery of the strength and passion that had always existed within her, simply buried under the weight of grief. When the official ceremony concluded, giving way to a tour of the facilities and a small reception, Robert found himself momentarily alone, watching from a distance as Esperanza and Maximus were surrounded by people interested in the therapeutic program. "It's extraordinary, isn't it?" a familiar voice said at his side. Robert turned to find Evelyn Carter, holding a glass of champagne and looking in the same direction. How a seemingly tragic accident can trigger so many positive changes. "Sometimes we need something to fall apart so we can rebuild," Robert replied, remembering the words Michael had spoken months before. "Exactly," Evelyn nodded. "As a doctor, I've seen many physical recoveries, but the true healings, the ones that transform lives, always involve something more. A connection, a renewed purpose, a rediscovery of joy." Robert smiled, thinking about how much his own life had changed. "You know, before the accident, my life was so orderly, so predictable. I thought that's what I wanted: security, routine, control. But now I understand that I was simply existing, not living." Maximus always knew, of course. That dog has been wiser than all of us from the beginning. As if he had heard his name, Maximus suddenly appeared beside them, followed by Esperanza, whose face was animated by the excitement of the conversations. "Robert, the director of the Children's Hospital, is very interested in implementing the therapeutic program as part of their regular treatment," she exclaimed, taking his hand enthusiastically. "And Lucia says she could coordinate monthly visits from Austin to supervise the development." Robert smiled at her excitement. "It seems you found a new vocation, Mrs. Rodriguez." "Not new," she corrected, her eyes shining. "Recovered, like so many other things in my life." The look they exchanged communicated more than any words could express: gratitude for the shared past, joy for the present, and hope for the future that stretched before them. Around them, the celebration continued. Michael was animatedly discussing with officials from other jurisdictions interested in replicating the program. Lucia was showing photographs of her own projects in Austin. Municipal officials were congratulating each other on the event's success. But for Robert and Esperanza, accompanied by the loyal Maximus, there was a parallel universe of deeper meaning, one in which the ruins of the past had been transformed into foundations for something new and beautiful. As the sun began its descent behind the hills surrounding Santa Monica, bathing the old ranch in golden light, Robert thought about the strange and wonderful paths that fate takes. An accident that almost cost him his life had been paradoxically the beginning of a fuller and more meaningful existence. A devastating loss had eventually opened the door to a new love. And a dog, with his unwavering loyalty and his ability to connect human hearts, had been the catalyst for it all. "What are you thinking about?" Esperanza asked, observing him with that intuition that always seemed to detect his moments of deep reflection. "Horizons," Robert replied. "How sometimes we think we've reached the end of the road, only to discover that there's a whole new world beyond, waiting for us." Esperanza nodded, understanding perfectly. Francisco used to say that the horizon isn't a limit, but an invitation. "A wise man," Robert commented, thinking how much he would have liked to have met the man whose portrait still held a place of honor in the house they now shared. Not with jealousy or discomfort, but with genuine respect for the man who had loved Esperanza first and had helped her become the extraordinary woman who was now by his side. He was, she confirmed, before adding with a mischievous smile, "And I think he would completely approve of you, especially after seeing how the ranch turned out." Maximus, apparently tired of so much solemnity, let out a small bark that sounded suspiciously like impatience. "I think someone is ready to go home," Robert laughed, stroking the dog's head. "Then let's go home," Esperanza replied, the simple pronoun our implicit in her tone, confirming the promise sealed with the key she now carried close to her heart. As the three of them calmly walked away from the celebration, toward the path leading back to the city, they formed a perfectly harmonious silhouette against the golden sunset, a man, a woman, and a dog, moving together toward horizons none of them would have imagined just 6 months before. And in that perfect moment, each in their own way, Robert with his new openness to unexplored possibilities, Esperanza with her rediscovered joy of living, and Maximus with his instinctive canine wisdom, understood the same essential truth, that even after the most devastating storms, after the collapses that seem to destroy our foundations, there is the possibility of reconstruction, of rebirth, of discovering with wonder and gratitude that what initially seems like an end can be in reality a beautiful beginning. My friends, we've reached the end of the story. Did you like it? What lesson can you take from this story? Leave it here in the comments. Like this video, subscribe to the channel and watch this video that's playing on your screen. This story will impact you. Until next time.